Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Question Everything podcast with your host, Cameron Hogan. Today's guest is Peter Christian. I look at Peter as a role model when it comes to always being on a constant pursuit of improvement. Peter has written multiple books, including Influences and Influencers, How Relationships Affect and Shape Us, along with What About the Vermin Problem? After reading his books, it's become obvious that Peter has a gift in identifying the attributes that separate great leaders from just another average, terrible boss. In today's podcast, we're going to do a deep dive into what makes someone a great leader in all aspects of life, particularly in the workplace. So Peter, thank you for coming on the podcast today. How are you today?
First, thank you very much for having me. And secondly, I'm doing very well, thank you.
I'm glad to hear it. Very happy to have you on. So, Peter, one of the very first things that you go over in your book, Influences and Influencers, is a quote by Stephen Covey. And I want to recite that to you real quick. And that is, treat a man as he is, and he will remain as he is. Treat a man as he can and should be, and he will become as he can and should be. What does this quote mean to you, and what made you decide to put this in the book?
I think it's a general philosophy that I developed over time, and when I found it, it just hit the mark. Too many people are taken for granted, I think. They're not considered for the potential that they have, but for where they are at whatever point in life that you come across them. And I think finding the true potential of a person and cultivating that and helping them along and encouraging them is one of the greatest things that we can do for people, particularly if we're managers or leaders of those people in whether it's a business organization or some volunteer organization or whatever the case may be. And I think it pays itself back in spades. They recognize that, they appreciate it, and you get rewards in return for that. So it means a lot to me.
It makes a lot of sense. One thing I've noticed about that recently is, thankfully at the current moment, I have a partner who I think for the very first time in my life, when it comes to romantic relationships, is someone who truly treats me as the person I can and should be, and the image they can potentially see me being closest to my fullest potential, and that's how they view me on a daily basis. And when I say that has shifted so many parts of my life for the better, I can't even put it into words properly. When someone looks at you through that lens of what you can be, instead of just the 23-year-old I am now, who haven't accomplished that much in this big world, but when someone looks at you through that lens, it is a game changer. So when I saw that quote on one of the first few pages, it really hit home with me. Another thing I want to bring up that you talked quite a bit in your book is your former boss, Bill Clymer. He made a big impact on you in his early career. What is the biggest lesson Bill taught you about leadership?
One, to be yourself. When you try to be something that you're not, you're fooling yourself, really. You're not fooling anybody else because it comes across. So be yourself, and if you want to make changes to that. Don't be afraid to try things and to fail. Because we learn through failure, and we correct those failures and we move on. And give people the opportunity to grow. Don't tell them, oh, well, that's been tried already, so forget it, or, oh, that'll never work. You may give them a pointer that it hasn't worked in the past, so you might want to try a slightly different approach or such, but the encouragement that I got from Bill to to be myself, to try to do different things, even if they had been tried before. And in some cases, it turned out well, and things moved ahead. And in others, I learned, yeah, I know why it doesn't work now. So I got to learn for myself. And he never put me in a position where I could mess up so badly that we couldn't recover from it. He would draw the boundaries, and that was appreciated as well. And I think everything should have some boundaries to it. So, it's just kind of the person where you could talk to them, that they were approachable no matter how smart they were and what they had achieved. And he was a pretty powerful guy in the company. He didn't have to give me the time of day if he didn't want to, but he was trying to develop me, and for that I'm forever appreciative.
So it seemed as if Bill Clymer was able to kind of create an arena for you to be successful in. He had parameters to make sure that you didn't, do anything that would jeopardize the company or your own job for that matter. But he created this, I guess, lack of a better term, a safe space for you to really exercise your capabilities and to see what was best for you. And also he was there as a coach beside you at all time. And I've had many coaches in my life, played a lot of sports, and one who is able to not be quick with their temper and be patient with you, I think is something that is much needed for that level of growth. And it definitely seemed like you had that in Bill. So that's pretty incredible. I want to let you know, Peter, one of the reasons why I wanted you to be on this podcast to begin with is a lot of my audience is my age, of 23. They just got out of college and they're moving their way into the workforce. And I see a lot of mixed communication out there when it comes to people my age on what they should do when it comes to treating others, whether it's out in the real world, relationships, or in the workplace. And your books really gave me a personal roadmap of the do's and don'ts and how to act. One thing I want to ask you, with my generation and being in social media and Instagram and TikTok being such a prevalent part of our day-to-day lives, we see a lot of people out there that willingly give the advice of fake it till you make it, of you have to act the part before you can be the part. Someone like you who has been in leadership positions and also have had great leaders, would that have been advice that they would have given you back in the day?
To some degree, yes. Maybe not as directly. The people that I highlight in that book who did help me did so very forthrightly, but not where they were pushing it in my face. They were doing it in a subtle way. They would give me guidance. They would give me suggestions, and I would take those. I would think about them, and then I would take those suggestions. And I think that's what you need to do. That's the encouraging part again. It's not that, don't do that or do this or, that's absolute. There's no absolutes in life because each person's circumstances are a little bit different and things change over time. And you have to be flexible with that. But if you've got somebody there that you can talk to who can provide that guidance that you can open up to, and you had mentioned some of the things like TikTok and that, you have to be careful with that too, because as many good people as are on the world who want to help you, there are some not so good people who just will throw all sorts of stuff at you, and it's not good for you, and you've got to learn from that. You've got to separate those things out. So you got to be careful who you open up to, who you confide in, who you take advice from, all right, and then follow. And if you do that, and it's a learning process, you'll make some mistakes along the way. I'm a very trusting person, and sometimes I've gotten burned by being too trusting of people, so I'm a little bit more cautious. Just my educational background of industrial engineering, we were taught to always check things out and to verify them and to question. And I think people need to do that, particularly at your age. You're still learning your way around. And again, you want to be trusting to people, by and large. You don't want to be cynical. But by the same token, there are some not so good people out in the world who can do you some harm, and you have to recognize that. So just proceed a little cautiously. Don't jump into things wholeheartedly and give everybody your trust. Trust is earned, okay? And sometimes it's broken. Sometimes the person that you trust a lot suddenly does something and you go, wow, I didn't see that coming, and you got to recover from it. And I've had those experiences in life as well, and they're disappointing, but you know, that's the way things are. But by and large, stay open, listen. I always listen to my seniors. I listen to the people who had a lot of experience. Again, maybe not in the highest of positions, but in some of, not that I would call low positions, but less up in the chain, so to speak. And I learned a lot from those people. They had so much to teach me. And if you just listen to them, first of all, they will tell you everything, and they will tell it to you honestly and forthrightly, and you can learn from them. And I did, because it's nice to know where things came from and why they are the way they are today. And then from there, you can decide what you want to do to either deal with them or change them or whatever the case may be. So,
one thing I've noticed so far that seems to be a pretty big misconception when it comes to young people starting off their careers is that we have this kind of notion that the people above are not willing to give their input or give their true thoughts and experience, and won't be there to help us because potentially we could raise up the ranks higher than they could, you know. But I've noticed in every industry I've been in that the more experience a person has, the more they realize that the better I do, the better they do. And that they are, if I'm willing to ask, which very few people my age are, if I'm willing to ask, they are an open book when it comes to accessibility, when it comes to information. You seem to have had that quite a bit at a young age when it came to your leaders in your businesses that you were a part of. Now, one question I want to ask you, Peter. There's a big difference between great leaders and people who are in leadership positions.
yes.
What separates a great leader from people who are just in those leadership positions?
Certainly empathy for the people who work for them. And again, empathy, not sympathy. Empathy is understanding where they're coming from, not necessarily agreeing with it, but understanding where they're coming from, their point of view, why they're acting or saying what they're saying or doing or whatever the case may be. And then from there, providing guidance to the individual. Not telling them that they're wrong, because again, we all have our own perspectives and so forth, but how they might want to modify their perspectives, how they might want to modify how they're acting, how they need to make better choices on certain things. And again, in a caring way where it helps the person. We talk about constructive criticism. Constructive criticism is providing that guidance without tearing the person down, because not everything that everybody is doing is wrong, and similarly not everything that everybody is doing is right. So it's kind of taking the not so good parts out and reworking them and keeping the good parts, because you don't want to throw those away, and making sure that at the end of the day the person understands where you're coming from, and they feel good about themselves and what they're doing. If they've made a mistake, fix the mistake. And that's another thing that I've always learned is when you make a mistake, don't just let it sit there and let somebody else try to clean it up. Clean it up yourself. You'll learn from it, and you'll learn not to make that mistake again, whatever it is. And then you go from there, and hopefully it won't happen again. Or if you see it on the horizon, you'll know from your experience, and you'll know what to do and what not to do. So I think that great leaders They provide the vision. They give the working conditions that allow people then to complete the vision. They don't interfere. They interfere from the standpoint that they're there to pay attention and, again, to make sure that if somebody's really messing up, that they get in and guide them so that, damage is minimal and they can move on. But they basically give people a lot of latitude to complete what they need to complete and to learn and to do. And then they give them credit for it. A good leader doesn't take the credit him or herself. They take some of it because obviously they're going to take the guff if something goes wrong, but they're giving out the credit to the people who accomplish what need to be accomplished, who are doing the actual work. And that's part of encouragement, and that's part of mentorship, and that's part of developing people, and that's part of caring for people, because no one person is so smart that he or she knows everything and can do everything. They're reliant on other people, and that's what I always told the people who work for me. You don't need me, but I need you. I need you to do what you need to do. If you mess up, it's my problem as much, if not more so, than yours, because that's the expectation of a manager or a leader, is that they take responsibility, not just for what they're doing, but what their people are doing. So they understand that. And I say to them, I'm giving you the opportunity to make choices. Now, if you decide not to make choices, there's still choices that need to be made, and I will then make them, and you will live with them, and they will be your choices because you decided not to do it on your own. You don't want that because you probably know a lot more about certain things than I do, and therefore I'm relying on your expertise in order to get it done. If you don't take that opportunity, then you passed on it. You made a decision. Now you have to live with my decision, and it's yours. No complaints about it. Oh, I didn't do that, or I didn't say that, or that was Pete's. No, that you had the opportunity to do it. So I had a very good understanding with my folks. And by and large, the good folks, the people who really wanted to accomplish and work together, they took it, they appreciated it, they did a great job, they got rewarded for it. I gave great raises and reviews and so forth to people, to the detriment of human resources who didn't like that all the time. How can you do that? Well, I was kind of demanding of my people, and they performed, so they should be rewarded for it. And they understood that. So we had a great relationship together. And I think that's what great leaders do, because that was what I experienced. So if you go by the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, well, the good things that I saw from the people who were above me and led me, I then tried to incorporate that and do the same with the folks who I was leading. And that's my opinion as to what a great leader is. Take completely the opposite of that, and you've got, yes, a leader, but not a good leader. They're a leader in name only, okay? And those are the forgettable ones, or those are the ones where you say, no, I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to do it exactly the opposite because I know that that's not right and that won't work. So
I completely agree. I've had, throughout my work life so far, I've had some incredible bosses. I would say A-plus bosses, to say the least, and then I've also had terrible bosses. And one thing I realized is I was able to put up with any job, but I couldn't put up with any boss. And I think that's something that so many people face, is that what the reason they stick with or the reason they leave a company is because of the person managing them. And so it seemed as if what you just talked about really narrows down to two things, and that's empathy and accountability. This kind of proper balance of, I'm here to watch over you, I'm here to make sure things are done well, I'm here to hold you accountable. That also being said, I'm going to be empathetic when you make mistakes. I'm going to understand the place you're currently in and put myself in your shoes so that I can lend out a hand instead of slapping the wrist. So it seemed as if those are the two levers that good leaders need to manage properly. So I really appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, just very quickly, there's a number of reasons why people leave jobs. Circumstances, they have to, deal with a certain situation. But I think the primary one is poor management. They just have had it. Even though they love the work, the person that they're working under just, it's a problem. And you don't have to put up with that. There's so many opportunities in life. And somebody asked me once, when do you know? I said, when the pain is so much that you can't stand it anymore. Okay? You don't do it the first time. Okay, you learn from it, you move on, you try to work with the boss. But if it keeps going and keeps going, then at some point you go, enough is enough. I don't need to put up with this. My son just went through that. My oldest, he was working for a firm, and they were not honest with him and with the folks that he worked with. I don't think he was getting paid the right, and he had finally had it and made the decision to move on. He moved on, and he's making twice as much money as he was making in the old company. I said, look at how underpaid you were. So, but he lasted for as long as he could until the pain got to the point where he said it's time to leave. So.
Now, Peter, in your book, I'm definitely paraphrasing here, but there was a part in your earlier career where you're going from one company to another, and the company itself said, you can be out and rid your hands of the company in a week and transfer over to that new company if you'd like, but you made the concerted effort to stay there and make sure the house was in order before you left. And that is something that I don't believe I personally embody. I don't think that's something a lot of people in my generation embody, because we're very quick to go to the next opportunity and look at our current situation, if it were to be left as, well, their problem now. Not my problem. Moving on, bigger and better things. So your perspective on that was, I knew inherently kind of the right thing to do, but it still kind of shocked me, like in this book, I can resonate with a lot of the things that great leaders are doing, but I don't know if I do that. Still to this day, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
What happened throughout your life that gave you the perspective that whatever you leave, you're going to make sure it's better off before you leave, and you make sure you tidy up before you walk away?
Well, also in the book, I write about how we're placeholders for the things that we do. As high as we rise in corporations or in life, we're placeholders. Somebody came before us, somebody is going to come after us. Whatever position we hold is temporary at best, even if it's for 20 or 30 years or whatever the case may be. And I think that it's incumbent on us, when we take that position, to do the best job that we can do, and to leave it in a good place so that the person who succeeds us then has a good jumping off point, and then we'll take it to the next level. They're not there to maintain. They're there to take whatever we did and to make it better, because you should be. You should always be looking to make things better. So I've never wanted to leave a job undone. Now, you can say, well, a job may never be undone. Well, that's true. But at some point, you say, okay, I've got it in a good place, and it's time to pass it on to the next person or persons. And that was true in that example. I had a lot of things that were still open that needed to be done. And to just walk out and leave them undone, to me, was wrong. And it's not the kind of person I am. Now, what I did then was to work with the different individuals, because I had a lot of respect for the people that I work with, and that's why they wanted me to leave, because they said, you've got very close ties, and we think that there'll be some problems here with some of the other people because they're going to be so upset about you leaving. Well, that was a good thing. I was glad that people were going to be upset that I was leaving, because that means they cared about me. But I didn't want to leave them in the lurch. So I spent the time to go through where I was at, what I was doing, what I was going to do next, what needed to be done, completing things that I could get done in the time frame that I had, which was only a week or two. But then they knew what was going on, and they could always call me if they needed to. I forget now if people did, if they had questions or that. But they had that opportunity to do it because I did not want to leave them in a bad position. And I still had ties to the company. They had given me the opportunity. It was a good company. It still is to this day. But it's just something that's inherent in me. I think it was my upbringing that my parents taught me responsibility. And one of those things was to make sure that you completed the job that you were supposed to, and you did it well to the best of your ability. So it's just a personal trait that I have. I think there are a lot of other people that have that as well. And hopefully your listeners will feel that way too, that they will take a personal responsibility. But again, you're a placeholder. Do the best you can with what you have at the time, and then turn it over to the next person in good shape so that they can take it and move it forward. And I think that's a good way to live. And you would, again, expect that from a person who you're succeeding with. I've moved into jobs before where they left things in a terrible state, and I had all sorts of stuff I had to clean up because of it. And it's not what you want to do. I always say when somebody goes to work each morning, they don't say, oh, I can't wait to see what kind of problems I'm going to run into today. Oh, I live for that stuff. People don't. They want to accomplish things. Solving problems is usually because something's messed up, and just to clean it up gets you back to where you should have been in the first place. So the less problems you can leave for somebody or create for somebody, the better it is for them. They appreciate it, and you feel good about what you did and what you accomplished and what you left for them.
That's understood. Yeah, I really appreciate that difference in opinion. It's very odd because it's this balance. I think it's definitely situation by situation, right? Where there are people that I know that are in my grandparents' generation or even father's generation where they stuck with a company and a certain job for their entire career. They got it when they're my age, and until they were 65, 70, they were there. And that's kind of talked about with this symbol of pride, to say the least. And then I look at my generation, and when we think of that, we think of, oh my gosh, they were stuck in the same thing for 40 years. Like as if it's this, terrible thing. And I'm still very conflicted because if there's turmoil in the company, like there are for a lot of companies, if you're being paid the exact same 40 years later, if all these things are the case, then it does make sense to leave. But also, I think it's important to remember the example you just brought up when it comes to making sure the house is in order before any move is made. Even like your son, for example, who you just said had to go from one job, who was paying him pretty much half of what he was worth. There's still like this friction of, even though they're treating me not the best, even though I'm severely underpaid, I don't want to leave. Like, it's this very odd dynamic that I think a lot of us still face. And I think finding the perfect tranquility for all that is something we all need to search for when it comes to working, I guess.
Yeah, even when we leave a difficult situation, there's always that nagging feeling that we have, because we are creatures of habit. And we don't, by and large, as creatures of habit, like change. Even when we realize that change is necessary. We don't like to, because we're comfortable with what we did, even if it causes problems in that. And I had that when I left the company. Again, I had a number of friends there. Very good people who I really liked and I liked working with. But it was time for me to move on and to make that break. And I did. And now it was a new circumstance, and I made new friends and so forth. So it's difficult. It really is. My son went through that too. He hemmed and he hawed about it and so forth. And finally he made the decision. Again, at what point is the pain so much that it's time to make a change? And don't be afraid to make the change. I don't see people staying at companies for 20, 30, 40 years anymore, like you had mentioned, like our parents did. I didn't. The longest I stayed at any one company was about 15 or 17 years. Now, that's still a pretty long time, but it isn't 40 years. I think those days are over. Unless you own the company, you started it, and you last 40 years in it. But by and large, you're going to make a number of changes. I believe the average nowadays is somewhere around 5 to 7 years. It might even be a little bit less than that. And at one time, that was not considered good. When somebody was bouncing around, you went, well, why can't they stay? Why can't they hold a job? Why don't, they're going to be disgruntled and leave in a short time. It's not a stigma anymore. It's just a fact of life. And in fact, in some cases, people wonder why you stayed so long at a company. Why did you stay there? I had that one time when I worked at Crayola. A new vice president came in, saw that I had been there for 15 years. He said, well, why have you stayed so long? I said, well, it's a good company. I enjoy what I'm doing. I love the people. I think I get that back. Why not? Well, he couldn't understand that. He had come from a different place, and he bounced around quite a bit. And so he didn't understand why that was long-term. And that wasn't anything, because in my day, they had 40-year club at Crayola and 25-year club and so forth. So I think those are a thing of the past. But, times change, and so do our attitudes.
Definitely. Yeah, I really don't think those times will ever be back. One of the things that I've been in tune with recently, when it comes to people in the workforce, whether they're software engineers, this happens a lot in the tech space, but it's also kind of spreading across other spaces nowadays, is people stay at a job for 2, 3, 4 years and then strategically move on to the next one, simply because they believe the longer you stay with a certain employer, the equivalent of the amount of money you should be making according to your market value diminishes. So when you hop from employer to employer, every time you do that jump, you're obviously probably going to get a large pay raise than you would have had at your previous employer. So it's this new strategy that I see so much of my workforce jumping into, and I'm really fascinated on why that is. I think there is the notion of like your company taking care of you, and the pension's going to be waiting for you one day. And I forgot, is it like the silver watch or whatever it may be, aluminum watch, you're there for a certain amount of years, you get a certain type of watch that my grandfather used to always tell me about. That just seemed to evaporated. And so it's definitely a new day and age when it comes to type of professions and also how people treat their employer. So it's fascinating to get your thoughts on that.
The one vice president I worked for was telling me, and he said, when you hit a new company, particularly at the executive level, he said they give you about a year, maybe a year and a half to make all sorts of changes. He said after that time, he says you just kind of become part of the furniture, and you're not allowed to go and do stuff like you did when you first came. He said because when you first come, they're so happy that you're there and they want your new ideas and that, but then you become kind of part of the scenery and they don't listen to you as much. Why that is, I'm not sure, because I don't think you use up all your good ideas in a year and a half, but unfortunately that seems to be the way it is, particularly at higher level positions. And why they don't compensate you appropriately for it, why they let you go with the experience and the knowledge that you have gained and the things that you've accomplished there, and that you're not rewarded for it, and you go to someplace else that you haven't done anything for, and they give you a lot more money than you were making, and you go, well, why is that? I haven't done anything for you yet. But that just seems to unfortunately be the way it is sometimes. When I ran my own company, which I did everything I could to compensate our folks appropriately and tried to keep them there. because of the knowledge base that they had and because they were good people, and I wanted that to be the last place they would work. But in some instances it didn't happen. Again, things happen with people. A variety of different things in your life. It may be that they're perfectly satisfied with the company, but there was something else that happened and they had to leave. So I've personally experienced that, where people have left after a fairly short period of time. But that's just the way it is, and you deal with it. So again, you treat people when you're in a position to, as well as you can, and you hope for the best. Because to bring a new person on board, even as bright as they are, until they learn the lay of the land and what you're doing and how you're doing it and what the expectations are, it takes a period of time. And the person you just left go, or who decided to leave, took all that knowledge and experience with them, and that's hard to replace. But that's just the way it is, and as a manager or a leader, you need to recognize that and deal with that. And again, there's nothing wrong with it. Loyalty of a company to an individual and an individual to a company is a two-way street for sure. And when you do not feel that that loyalty is being paid back, that may be the pain part that says it's time to move on. And nobody should begrudge you for doing the best that you can do for you. Because if you stay there, and let's say you're making $100,000 a year, and they're giving you 2% pay increases, which is what, about $2,000 a year, and you can go somewhere else and they'll pay you $130,000, why would you not do that? Why would you not take the additional $30,000? Because it's going to take you 15 years at $2,000 a year to get there, and you can get it, boom, by making the change overnight. So more power to you. More power to you for doing it. And again, it's stuff we all have to weigh. It's decisions we have to weigh. I was fairly loyal to the companies that I worked for, although the first company that I left that you had mentioned that we started with, I think I was there less than 2 years before I left. The next one, Crayola, I was there 17 years, so a lot longer than that. And I finished out my career with my company at 17 years, running my own company. And in between, I had some other stuff going on. So, variety of different things. And I changed jobs, what was it, I guess 4 or 5 times. But even within the company, I changed jobs. I didn't stay static. Okay, I looked for new opportunities, new learnings, to improve myself, to get as high as I could in the organization. In some degrees, that's like changing jobs as well. Because, when we talked about people staying a long time, sometimes they stayed in the same job for 40 years, which I can't imagine. It would just be like, ooh. So I would say I probably changed jobs every 2 years or so, maybe even less than that.
Interesting.
So go for it. Go for it, guys, ladies.
Good to know. So, Peter, one thing I want to highlight about your book, one of the chapters you labeled what is really important, the end result. And then you followed it by a quote by the great John Wooden that says, "Don't mistake activity with achievement." Yes. Why did you think that quote was so important to add to your book?
Because I've seen that happen too often, where people think that spending a lot of time and effort is where it's at, and that's what they should be rewarded for. You don't get compensated for that. You get compensated for what you accomplish with the time and the effort you put in. I know a number of people who spent a lot less time and effort than others and got a heck of a lot more done. And I mean seriously done, not just activity-wise done, but accomplishment-wise done. And I had one fellow in particular who spent oodles of time and was getting very little done, and he would come to me and I'd say, there's something wrong then in your approach. Again, constructive criticism. Because if you're spending that much time, you should be getting more done. So there's a problem here, and we need to address that. I think that achievement is really what you get graded on. what you accomplish, what you get done, not just for yourself, but for the organization, how they benefit from it. That's what you get paid for, and you should get paid for it. You should get recognized for it. If you spend, I hear people that spend 80 hours a week at work, and I go, that's crazy. To me, and when I was running my own company, we averaged 45 hours a week. Now you might say, well, that's excessive. That was to compensate because we had a fairly good policy as far as vacation and personal time off and so forth. So that was time that people were still getting compensated for, but they weren't working, and we were billing clients based on people time. So when they did work, we figured 45 hours a week was a good average. That allowed us to pay good salaries. That allowed us to pay great benefits. We paid zero premium health care gave it to them. You tell me any company today where you don't pay a premium or part of your premium for health care, and people would go, when can I come to work for you? We paid great bonuses. We paid 25% bonuses. We paid 50%. One year we paid a 50% bonus. Can you imagine getting a year and a half's worth of pay for a year's worth of work? So we were very good in compensating our people. But then we expected accomplishment, because the only way we were able to afford that was to turn out good work, to get more work from companies, to bring the money in that we were able to afford to do that with people. So it worked both ways. So like I said, seeing people who spend an awful lot of time doing stuff and getting very little done, and people who spend a lot less time than them and getting a lot more done, I will take that, the latter versus the former, and that's what I'll judge people on. That's what I'll help to guide them towards. So you don't have to kill yourself, all right? And you also know when to cut off, okay? Time in, time in. Guess what? Tomorrow's another day. Some things can wait. Not everything is an emergency. I learned that a long time ago in my career. Not everything is an emergency. Even when people tell you it is, it isn't. You can determine that for yourself. When the house is on fire, that's an emergency. When you need to repaint the house, that's not an emergency. That's something you take care of as time allows. So
it's definitely good to make that distinction. I'm very happy with my generation's kind of rethinking of the hours they're putting into work. There's two sides of it, right? There's the 8th place trophies where, no matter the end result, as long as you do the activity, you'll get a ribbon, you'll get a trophy. There's that side of it. But then there's also the side where I see, thankfully, happening quite a bit more, and more companies are adopting, where they don't have any correlation between time and output. So that if you can get the required task done that we set out for you for the day, for the week, for the month, done in 20% of the time than what the 40-hour work week would give you, then you're all good. Go ahead and go home. You go upon with your life. And I think that's really what it comes down to. As long as you're delivering and getting results, why does it matter how much time it takes? I understand that the 8 hours put in, the 9 hours a day, I think that was put in place by Henry Ford back like a century ago. But I feel as if it's so outdated now, especially with technology nowadays that can do the work of hundreds of people, thousands of people with your fingertips. So yeah, I'm happy to see my generation go through that. One thing I want to bring up with you, Peter, another thing that you mentioned in the book, this is something that really stuck with me. And I think this was another John Wooden quote, and it was, you focused on your character rather than the reputation. And that's what you focused on instilling in others, their character over the reputation. Why is that? Why was it so important for you?
Reputations are kind of a funny thing. It's a person's interpretation of you, okay? Somebody who is very quiet and not outgoing does not mean that they don't like people. It just means that they're introverted, and they get their strength from kind of being alone, doing things alone, not being out there glad-handing or being the life of the party or whatever the case may be. And that's the way they are, and that's the way they're constructed, and you shouldn't try to change that and say, well, you need to be more outgoing. That's just not in their character. Similarly, the person who is outgoing, and thrives on the fact that they do like to be with people and be out there, being friends with folks and so forth. That's what they thrive. There's nothing wrong with that either, and you need to understand those things. And each one of those are characteristics of the individual. And I think the more that we understand that and appreciate it, and not try to turn one into the other, is important. Because, like I said back when, if you try to be something you're not, or somebody you're not, it's going to come through, and it's not going to work very well. So you need to be true to yourself and who you are, and while you're trying to do the things that we talked about, like, getting the job done and doing a good job and making sure that you leave things in a good place, you do it in the way that works for you, and you'll get it done. Okay? Again, it's the end result that matters. So reputation, it's a very fickle thing. You can be up at the top today, and you can be down at the bottom tomorrow. Look at people who we build up and then we tear them down, and so forth. But it's what you do over the long term, and it's also what you do when the spotlight's not on you that's the most important. That's really what determines what character you have. The people who turn it on when the spotlight's on, and when the spotlight is off, they act completely differently. Be careful of those folks. It's what they do when the spotlight is not on them, how they treat people, how they act, how they think. If it's any different than when the spotlight is on, then you got a problem there, because you have somebody who's not being honest with you and not being honest with themselves. So that's what I'm looking for in a person, is that character, all right? That they're consistent. I may not agree with them. My father always told me that. He said there's different types of people. There will be some people who come up to you and tell you you're their best friend, and they'll pat you on the back, and then when you two part, they're talking behind your back and they're bad-mouthing you. He said, I'd rather, and then there's the person who you don't agree with, who will tell you straightforward, I like you or I don't like you, and here's how I'm going to deal with you. He said, that's the person you can trust, because at least you know where they're coming from. You may not love them, all right, but at least you know where they're coming from. And that always stuck with me. So people that we consider our friends, they should be acting the same way, again, when everybody's looking as when everybody is not looking. And if they're not, then they're really not our friends. And we need to make a distinction of that. And that's all character. That's all character. Reputation, I've had a lot of people tell me, oh, you should listen to so-and-so. And I know so-and-so, and on a one-on-one basis, I wouldn't listen to them, I wouldn't trust them, I wouldn't rely on them to get stuff done, and I'll say, thank you very much, but no. But yet their reputation is, oh, they're just wonderful people, they get so much done, and it's like, no, they don't. No, they don't. But they've got a reputation, okay? So it's getting to know people, getting to know about them, what makes them tick, how they tick. Again, you may not agree with it, but at least you understand it and you can deal with it, I think is important. And some of the people in public that I disagree with the most, but I know that they're true and honest and convicted to what they're dealing with, I like them better than some people who I may agree with, but I don't think that their convictions are there quite as much. They say it because it's the right thing to say as opposed to what they really believe.
Yeah, I think in that response you gave, there's so many little tidbits that can be taken out as words to live by. I think it's so important, especially people my age, to really, truly, deeply understand the difference between character and reputation, because reputation is all that we are consumed by. If you look at your Instagram profile, your Facebook profile, your TikTok, whatever it is, that's what you're putting out to the world. You're curating your reputation in a way that we've never been able to do before, where it's the human highlight reel, you know? And I'm not going to say that Instagram influencers don't have character, because they can definitely have great, abilities in both areas. But I think if, as a society, we focused more on the character part, we could just treat each other better and just live overall more happier, fulfilling lives. So I love that you put that in the book.
Yeah, somebody who, again, is wonderful to the powerful and the important. Well, to me, it's how they treat the less powerful and the less important, the people who are not in those high-level jobs, but the average day-to-day person. And if they treat them the same and with the same respect, that's the person I want to be like. If they treat them differently, oh, well, you're just a dishwasher, you're just a garbage man. No, if they're doing their job and they're doing it well and they're doing it to the best of their abilities, they have all the respect in the world from me, okay? And you should treat them with that respect, okay? Just as you would the president of a corporation. To me, there's no difference. In fact, I hold the president of the corporation to a higher standard, because he's getting paid or she's getting paid a heck of a lot more than the dishwasher or the garbage man, and I expect a lot more out of them, okay? And going back to what we talked about with me listening to the experienced people, the senior people that had been there for a long time, that were not in high-level positions but knew the ins and the outs of what was going on in the company, I listened to them, and I listened intently, and they appreciated it, and I appreciated it, and we became great friends, okay? Because they knew that I trusted them and their opinions, and they in turn trusted me and what I was trying to do, and they understood where I was coming from, and they knew that I wouldn't do something just on a whim, that there was a reason for it, and I would explain it to them. So I think that's very important, that we act that way. Treat everybody with the respect that they deserve, okay? No matter what position they hold. Because they're people. They're people.
I love that.
And they should be treated with respect.
I love that. Now, Peter, the final question that I ask every one of my guests on the Question Everything podcast is, what is the most important thing you feel the world needs to hear right now?
We need to deal more civilly with each other. Okay, there are differences of opinion. Like I said, we all come at things from different perspectives, all right? And to poo-poo them and to say one is right over the other and your opinion doesn't matter or your viewpoint doesn't matter, or to call you names. I've had that already. People who don't know me calling me names, and I'm going, why are you doing that? To me, that's childish. That was stuff that we used to do in the 3rd and the 4th grade, and I'm past that, okay? I'm way past being in the 3rd or 4th grade, so I don't do that anymore. Even if I don't like you, I'm not going to call you a name. But I think that civility has taken a major downturn, and that needs to come back. Because if we hope to get stuff accomplished, there are a lot of problems in this world, okay, and different ways that they can be approached and dealt with. And unless we listen to each other and try to compromise and deal with stuff instead of putting each other down and fighting and carrying on, we're not going to solve the problems. We're not going to accomplish anything. And chances are good we're going to wind up in wars or killing each other or hurting each other. And you see that all the time. And I see it getting worse. It should be getting better. We're supposed to be more civilized now than we were before. But I see it kind of going backwards to almost like we're becoming uncivilized. So I really need to see that in a variety of things, whether it's politics or business or social environments or whatever the case may be. It really bothers me. It really, really does. We used to be able to discuss things civilly and to have a debate on it and debate the merits. Now it's talking points and shouting over each other and name calling, and that's got to stop. It really does. You get nowhere doing that. All you do is you piss the other person off and turn them off, and then you get nowhere. So I would say that's the number one thing that I see, civility. We need to get back to a more civilized way of dealing with each other.
Those are wise words from a wise man. Peter, I very much appreciate you being on the podcast today. I really enjoyed your books. I'll make sure to put them, the Amazon links to them in the description for any of those who would like to read it. But besides that, Peter, you've been an absolute pleasure on the podcast, and we'd love to have you back on the podcast soon.
Oh, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I would love to come back at some point. And if people want to get in touch with me to discuss things further and share viewpoints civilly, I would love to do that. So please, by all means, do. So thank you very much. And anytime when you want to have me back. When we started, we said probably we could go for hours, but we have a time limit, so there'll be other chances.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you all for watching this episode of the Question Everything podcast. Look forward to seeing you next week.